Okay, I recently saw this movie. It was a bioptic of Michelle and her life and what she went through surviving in Compton. And I was personally never a resident of Compton, but I knew people who grew up in Compton, and I went to school very close with individuals who had family members or friends that went to schools in the surrounding area. And I grew up part of the way in Inglewood, so Inglewood is not that far from Compton, Watts, and all these other places are like sister cities, so it's very closely related. It's like neighboring cities. And I really felt like the movie was really good, and the depictions were good. The characters that were in her bioptic story was good. The way she described the mannerisms, the behaviors, the incidences, the events that led up to her rise and her fall and then her triumph. And I just wanted to talk about the abuse. The abuse is real. And I know it just doesn't happen in African American culture, it happens in other cultures as well. But primarily, the abuse was highlighted in this movie. And I can attest to what she was saying because during that time, it was the 80s, the 90s, and you had a lot of gangster rap and you had a lot of social influences in rap music and artists that were really high profiled. And you had Dr. Dre, you had Snoop Dogg, you had, movies that were coming out that were really popular, people who wanted to reenact what they saw in videos. And at the time, we didn't have social media like we do now, like where young people can go on YouTube and they can go on Facebook, FaceTime, and all these other websites, and they can strike up conversations and make videos and have cell phones. I believe back then there were pagers, and that was just barely coming out. And then there were cell phones, but they looked like garage door openers or like, dinosaur phones is what you would call. And at the time, you had real influential talent that came from the streets, and you had different genres of rap, you had different rap styles and different artists. And so I get a little pet peeved when I hear stories like, oh, rap music destroyed black culture, because to be honest, a lot of rap music saved a lot of lives of people who came from bad neighborhoods, bad home life. Had they not have had rap music to vent their frustration and to create their work and to become famous and popular, there would be no Tupacs, there would be no Dr. Dre's, there would be no Snoop Dogg, there would be no Too Short and all these other rappers that you've heard about, and there would be no Will Smiths. And because a lot of these people had talent, but they come from, some of them have different stories, different individual lives and different backgrounds, and they have different stories to tell. But a lot of them come from neighborhoods where rap was their ticket out of bad situations. And during that time, gangster rap was real popular. There were pop artists that were real popular, and there were clubs, and it seemed like that was a real like influential and popularized time for pop artists, black artists in rap industry and music. And the abuse was happening. The abuse was real, and it was happening to young people because they grew up in homes where they were around abuse. They saw their mothers being attacked and abused, and they accepted it, and they felt that they, as in young women who lived in backgrounds like that, thought that that was normal. Young men who lived in backgrounds that thought that was normal if they came from a situation where it was abuse going on. And there was, particularly in that time, a real big issue with teen pregnancy. And there were schools that were primarily for young teenagers. If they were pregnant and they were expecting a baby during their high school years, there was a specific schools that you could pick to go to, and you get counseling and you get help for transitioning into motherhood, and a bus would pick you up. And I had friends that I knew that knew other friends who were in those circumstances, and they had went through a series of abusive relationships, or they went through maybe an abusive baby daddy relationship. So I can attest to Michelle when she mentioned that abuse and what she had experienced when in the movie. If you seen the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, I would encourage you to watch it. But there were scenes that I were dead on when she said that it was something normal in the hood when you met a guy and he already had children by several different women, or he already had several different baby mamas. And you know, when I look at YouTube and you listen to all of the hate that's spewed on there towards black women, and you hear all this rhetoric about black women destroy the black community, black women have a lot of drama, and if you really, really go back and look at where all this is coming from, a lot of it is untrue. That really what has destroyed black communities is drugs, crack cocaine, heroin, poverty, being dependent on welfare and public assistance programs that don't help to get people established in life that they no longer need it. They pretty much keep them a slave to public assistance to where they can't be productive individuals. There's also gang violence. There was a lot of gangs in these areas, and I remember growing up in the Inglewood area, you would hear these helicopters, and they were police helicopters, and they were choppers, and they were always like around the holidays, the weekends, or like downtime when people weren't working through the busy week. They had the weekend, you'd hear somebody got shot, somebody had a drive-by, there was shootings, there was gang violence, there were killings. You'd see dead bodies. Literally, there was one morning that I was going to school. I stepped over a dead body, and you'd see the blood. You smell. I thought it was a wino in the beginning, but then I called my mom, and then she ended up having to call a coroner, and come to find out that these weren't winos. These are like dead bodies. So they had a series of events that would happen in the Inglewood area. Inglewood primarily had a real huge traffic of drugs, primarily crack cocaine, and this was during the times of the 80s, 90s, and there was a lot of abuse. You would see like a lot of young guys, they were involved in that lifestyle of trying to look like the gangster and have that persona. They're the pimp, the Mac Daddy, the gangster, and they have that look. And primarily this was a time when gangster rap was like really high during that time, and high as in like popularized and glorified. Basically, people were wearing a lot of jewelry, gold chains. They were wearing all the styles. You had all these rap artists that were coming out one after the others, all these African American movies that were real high profile movies that pretty much talked about the streets, talked about the neighborhoods, or they catered to black audience. And the music, is a huge influencer. It's a trendsetter. You're watching what the artists are wearing, what they're talking about, what they're saying in their lyrics. And some people are not able to separate fantasy from reality. So they see these music videos and they think, wow, this is interesting. Like I want to look like Michelle. I want to wear my hair like her. I want to sing like her. I can't sing like her. Maybe I don't have the talent, but I could dress and look like her. Maybe I could have the same boyfriends or somebody that has money or whatever. So, coming from those backgrounds, I can really, really attest to what she was saying in the movie, where she, you'd have young people who maybe they lived in a good family, and but they were taught that as women you had to submit and succumb to the vices of your mate, his abuse. And if it was abuse that he was giving you, it must have been something you did wrong. And so women would go around blaming themselves if they come from a background that taught them that. Now, there probably were people who weren't taught that way. Of course, I'm not saying everybody was in those circumstances, but you did see a lot of abuse. You did see a lot of baby mamas, a lot of women, young girls left with babies. There was gangs, there was crack cocaine, there was violence, there were drive-bys, there were shootouts. You had these Boys in the Hood movie, you had Menace to Society, you had a whole host of other movies. Um, Movies also depicting like good times, bad times. So all that was going on, 80s, 90s, clubs primarily, attracted a lot of people. And I noticed that I felt like back then, growing up in Inglewood, more people of color were more about trying to unify, and a lot of it I think primarily had to do with music. So you had a lot of more coupling and people trying to get together and everything more even back then. But there was that crack and the drugs, the PCP, the primo drug, and there were all kinds of abuse going on. And then there were women, young girls having babies, and they weren't married. And so there were a lot of things going on, and that wasn't all the girls' fault, because you had young guys, they were out in the street and they were enticed by older men about how to treat women, about how to get money really quick, about how to, become drug dealers and pimps and what have you. And so I said that in a previous video. That stuff was real, or how to be, this rapper. You were either you're going to be involved in sports and make it big, or you're going to be a big rapper, a rap star. And during the time I went to school, I went to, in the neighborhood of Inglewood, I went to Clyde Woodworth Elementary. I attended Morningside High, and in between there I went to Monroe Junior High, which is now probably called Monroe Middle School. And all of those schools are in like proximity of one another. And during the time that I attended Morningside High, some more popular people that you may know in this time is from Atlanta Housewives, Lisa Wu, who was known as Lisa Wu Hartwell. She was married to Keith Sweat, and then she married this guy named Ed Hartwell. They split, and then she had an incident with the star of The Cosby Show, Rudy Huxtable. I can't think of her name, but you know who I'm talking about, those of you who grew up in that time, or you're pretty in tune with what has been going on recently in social media. And recently I'll just say Rudy. The one I'm referring to, where she recently she was married to Lisa Wu's ex-husband, and then they had a little dispute, and it ended up on TMZ and the social media, and then it blew up, and it was about the split and her baby, and how he really wasn't ready to be a father, and the whole thing, the whole drama of all of it. But at the time, I was going to school with Lisa Wu, and I was also going to school with Lisa Leslie, who played for the Sparks. And before I had attended Morningside High, Byron Scott, who is the coach, or the manager of the Lakers, he had attended that school, and I believe he graduated from that school. And there might have been some other people that were in the music industry during that time that went to Inglewood High. I even remember people talking about O'Shea, or they were talking about Ice Cube at the time when he was just getting started, and they were just forming. Eazy-E and all of them were just forming NWA. So I wasn't really close to all of those characters, those people. but I do know of people who were or who knew them and who used to hang out and listen to their music when they were just starting out. Um, Now, when she mentioned the violence with Dr. Dre and the drinking, that I knew because years later I had attended a function that was in close enough, like in the Beverly Hills area. There was a club called A Different World, and it was in like the early 90s. He and Snoop Dogg were there, and Dr. Dre had several drinks, and you've heard the term happy drunk or violent drunk, and I think when he drinks, like in the movie, they said the guys were calling Michelle and they were warning her to get out of the house because Dr. Dre had several drinks and that he becomes violent, and that is true because I know that at that party it was like a promotional party for the release of the album, the Deep Cover album. That was a movie that Lawrence Fishburne was in, and Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre did music for the album of the movie Deep Cover. And for those of you that don't know about it, you can look it up. But they did some of the music on there. They, as in Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. And at the time when I met Snoop, I didn't meet him like, oh, hi, buddy, let's go have a few drinks. It was more like, like when you go to these functions, when they're not real, highly publicized and they're just getting started, you may meet people who, like, before their stardom, they may do promotional venues to try to get people to buy their album or to listen to their music, to try to build their clientele or fan base. And so at the time there was a club called The Different World. It was located in the Beverly Underground in the Beverly Center. And this was during the time when the Cosby Show was still airing, and they had a spin-off show. Lisa Bonet was in it, and all the kids grew up, and they went to, some of the kids went to Spelman College. They went to these prestigious black colleges, and this college was in a show that was a sitcom that aired several seasons. Lisa Bonet, Kadeem Hardison, and Sinbad, they were on this show called A Different World. So during that time, the club, I believe that's where they got the name A Different World, because they knew it would attract African American young people who, at that time, all that was real popular and that was happening, and it attracts that clientele or that fan base. And anybody that was anybody back then that was popular in rap, and they would attend these clubs to promote albums, to help promote albums. And so I believe he got violent that night with a female. Now, I don't know if this is the same one that they were talking about. Her name, I was trying to look her up because I believe I had pulled her name up earlier, because this is the one they were talking about, women being abused by Dr. Dre. Her name is Dee Barnes, and I don't know if she was there that night when that incident happened, because they mentioned he had punched some lady and that he was violent with some woman. And I remember that night, and there was heavy security at this venue. And so I don't know if that was the same woman or if it was a whole entirely different other woman. But put it this way, I know when Michelle said in the movie that, when she put that scene in there that he's violent when he drinks, that's true. The part about him having the baby mamas, and that was the thing to do in Compton, that wasn't just in Compton. It happened in Watts. It happened in Inglewood. There were guys that had lots of baby mamas. There were also young ladies who had a lot of baby daddies. So I have to put that in there as well, because when you come from backgrounds where that's what you see and that's what you're a product of your environment and that's what you've been raised or reared around, then you tend to go with that. You emulate that because that's what you're being taught. It's just like when people teach their kids how to hate other people of different faiths, backgrounds, nationalities, or race, they teach it. And it's the same thing in relationships, how you teach people to behave or how to act, or what they value as love, or who they value, whom they value, or what they see as beauty, or what they see as not beauty, or even if you're teaching them to hate themselves, even, and indirectly by hating black women. And there's like so many videos on social media that point out some negativity towards black females, but they never, those people who are doing it are a group of black males who are real bitter, they're real angry, they have resentment, they've had like some real bad experiences, and whatever it was, if it was with one or two individuals or something that happened in their life that just somehow they never could bounce back from that. And so anybody they come in contact with, you're going to get it. You're going to suffer. You're going to pay the price for what their failures are, or what they have endured in their lifetime, even if you weren't the reason why it happened. And everything is your fault all of a sudden. So I noticed there's a lot of videos too. I believe some of this is coming from the whole issue behind child support, the baby mama drama. And you do have women who, during that time, public assistance would be the option for young mothers who were unwed. And so those programs were in place for temporary assistance, but you have some people who use it for just that, for temporary assistance, and then you have some who abuse that system, and they never get on their feet. They seem to fall back into that cycle, and it becomes generational, where their kids end up in the same rut. And so it's generational poverty, and it's a big problem. And if you're in neighborhoods where that's all you can afford, that's the only place you can live, that's the only money you're making, and nobody wants you anywhere else because they're racist or they're biased, or they don't live next to in close quarters with blacks and Hispanics, you tend to be in those neighborhoods around people where they should have shared or similar experiences, and they're all pushed in those neighborhoods. You have Watts, Compton, Inglewood, and then you have the projects, the neighborhoods called the bottom, like in Inglewood they call it the bottoms. Certain streets where there was a high prevalence of crack cocaine. There's the drugs, there's the gang influence, and with gangs, you got the gangster rap. So if here is Los Angeles, you have different genres of music, of rap. You have your love rappers, which was L Cool J, and then you have your X-rated rappers, which was Too Short. He was like the Richard Pryor of rap music, where if you were listening to that, you didn't want your parents to find out you heard those albums, but we all did. And then you have your party rappers, your dance rappers, Will Smith, MC Hammer, and then you have your gangster rap, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, and a whole host of others. And then you have your, your party slash, he could be hard, or he was a lyricist. You have all these other type of rappers, and then they had trend setting where they would have the chains, the big gold chains, and you had your Flava Flavs, Public Enemy, you had all these Tribe Called Quest, you had rappers from other coasts, like East Coast, West Coast, you had Tupac, and then Notorious Big. And so all that stuff was real popular. All that stuff was real high profile and prolific in terms of the rap culture and the black culture, Hispanic culture, people in neighborhoods where they have shared similar experiences. So that goes with saying you had also all of the problems, all of the poverty and the drugs that were put in the neighborhood. Now, a lot of times when there's failures and tragedies, people who feel the aftermath of it tend to not want to be totally blamed, and they shouldn't really be totally blamed for all of their failures, because it there's always a beginning of how it began. It's funny. There's a beginning of how it began. There's always a beginning or a trigger of how it all started. And a lot of times you have racism. You're a product of your environment. You're in a neighborhood and you feel there's no way out. So you're in a neighborhood. Now, that's not everybody's situation. Some people are put in those situations, but they manage to go to college. They manage to live productive lives. Unfortunately, not everybody's going to end up that way, and everybody's to each his own. They're their own individual, and maybe someone else grew up from the same background, but they had a different experience but similar to mine, but they weren't as fortunate. Maybe they have health issues because of drug abuse. Maybe they can't get a good job now because of all of the you know things that they were involved in that had to do with criminal activity, people they hung out with. And when you're young and you're around peers and people that influence you in negative ways, those are things that are inevitable. And it's the same thing with women that, they're having babies at young ages, or they're not getting married, or they think that if they have sex with a guy that he's going to stay around, or if they have his baby. I even heard stories where young women would have a guy's baby thinking that that would make him stay. And so there's been a lot of training that people have gotten that have put them in situations that have been really negative and that have shaped their lives. And you can't necessarily look at those people and say, oh, it's all your fault, because maybe somebody influenced them. Maybe they were taught those things. Maybe they saw that in their household when they were growing up. And that's you seen in the movie where her mother was telling her, in the end, I might have taught you the wrong ways to look at how a relationship is supposed to be. That you shouldn't take this abuse. You shouldn't be abused like this. And primarily you see that black women, it seems as though that when black women is abused, it's not looked at the same way as when a white woman is abused. So let me make an example here. I don't know, I might be telling my age, but if you recall the Anita Hill incident with Clarence Thomas, and they made a big high profile case and they put all of her business and all his business out there, but it virtually made her look like she had asked for it, or was like it was her fault. And it was real polarized back then. And then the issue of OJ Simpson, and then you have Nicole Simpson and that horrific attack. But prior to him getting involved with his white wife, he had a black wife. And now I was told that she had also too endured abuse from OJ Simpson, but you never did hear that much about it. But when it happened to the wife that was of European descent, there was all this movement about, oh, we've got to stop this abuse towards women. And which women? White women, black women, or all women? All women. But it seemed like when the abuse is happening to a white female, it's, there's more drama put in it, where they want to stop domestic abuse. And now today, it's happening to it was happening to a lot of different people from different backgrounds back then. But media tends to kind of divide individuals by race, by color, by classism, and sometimes they kind of instigate racial bias and stereotypes and how people see other people of different backgrounds. So that's where you get a lot of this negativity towards black females. When there's a crisis, it's not taken as serious. You have this Black Lives Matter movement, and then you have these people who are trying to come to the forefront of black males, but also you have not only black males who are being murdered, you have black females, and you don't hear enough support about the black females that have been murdered. You hear all this support, everybody rallying around protection of, from police brutality, and we have to support our black males. But are the people in support of black females? So this movie comes at a time where there's been a rash of shootings. We're in the year of 2016, going on to 2017, and it's an election year, and there's been a lot of talk about racism, about social divide on social media, and race war. You'll hear things about that. You hear things about gang rape at colleges, and now more about how there's a lot of domestic abuse going on in relationships. And now you're hearing the story of Michelle, and she's got a bioptic story about her life during that time period of gangster rap. Which also, when you see those rap videos, you'll see black women who are, they're dressed really skimpy. They, look like they're strippers or prostitutes, or they don't have very many clothes on, and they're not really looked at in a positive sense. It's more like just sex objects, and that is where it's just devaluing and degrading black women on down the line. So when you see that constantly being showed, when you see people looking at one group of a female as, oh, she's just good for, sex, she's highly sexualized, or it's more of a lust thing. It's not, oh, I'm going to have kids and make her my wife, or I'm going to respect her and I'm going to treat her like the woman that she is. It's more like, oh, I'm going to treat her like a slut or a whore or a prostitute, or streetwalker or hooker or something like that. It's not the same. It's not the same as for women who aren't of color. They're looked at, like the incident. There was one incident that recently happened where rapper Ice-T, they claim that he had these 10 reasons of why he would prefer white women over a black female, and they're not sure that he really said these things, but from what had been posted on social media is that he did say these things, and that more than likely he didn't want to fess up to what he said. But think about it. Even though he's light complexion, he's still black, and his daughter, even though she might be half Euro, she's still, she's still within the black culture. She's light complexion, but one day she's gonna grow up and become a young lady, and I don't think he would want men to abuse her and be beating up on her, leaving her with kids, and abandoning her, and abandoning the responsibility of being a father to her kids. And people don't think about the things that they do and how they hurt people until they get older, and then until they realize how the impact that they made on their children and their children's children and the generation to come. And see, these people, these individuals, when they were doing this music at the time, young people usually don't think about, okay, what is it going to be like when I'm 60 or when I'm 50, 40, whatever. I'm going backwards, but when I'm 40, when I'm 50, I already knew, I have yet to see any rappers in the age of 50 and 60 years old, 70-year-old strippers and whatnot. I guess they're out there, but I don't see that as being attractive. And usually people, when they start getting older, they start to become, or we would hope that they become more wiser, and that they've learned lessons and made mistakes to learn lessons, to where they know now, if they come out of those things, that I don't want to do this again. So, like Dr. Dre, he made an apology, but it was disturbing because they mentioned something about there was some product from Apple, an endorsement or some money exchange or whatever. I don't know the whole logistics of it, but it almost seemed like it was set up right just at the nick of time, so that he was working on another project, an investment of money having to do with Apple. So it you know, all I know is that there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of pain, and it's shared within the black community with males and females. And so I'm not trying to say to just badmouth males per se, but if you look at the men, if they come from a background where they're seeing their mothers being battered, or their mothers on drugs, or their fathers on drugs, or their father's locked up, or their father's a drug dealer, he's a gangbanger. You also have gangs that are generational gangs, or generational criminals, things like that. And not all black people are criminals. I'm not trying to support that because that's not true, because I know of black people who don't have police records where they've gotten in trouble with the law and then they can't get it together and then they can't find jobs and what have you, or they have trouble getting their lives in order. I've been around people who come from those neighborhoods where there's been poverty, there's been struggles, but they managed to get through it, and they live and lead productive lives and have families. And you know, not all people are the same, or sometimes seeing those experiences with other people is a learning lesson. And you have some people that say, I don't want to live like that. And they may be from the same background, the same culture, lived in the same neighborhood, and they say, I don't want to live my life going through that. And so I think some of the hate too is the whole thing with child support, because I've heard men say that child support is the black woman's fault, and when it really isn't, because to make a baby, to have sex, and to produce that child. So, if people were careful in the beginning, which that doesn't always happen to everybody, but if people were more careful about whom they choose as partners, or what they do in their relationships with someone, then maybe they wouldn't have went through some of those predicaments. But now they're in it, so they have to be responsible and hold themselves accountable for what their actions are. And you have a bunch of individuals out there that are posting videos talking about how they hate child support, how they blame this on the black woman, and people do the blame game. And everything is the black woman's fault. The black woman destroyed the black community. Rap destroyed the black community. Nobody never points to the sources: drugs, gangs, bad rearing, home rearing. They never really are honest and focus on, okay, what happened. And then you have, if you heard the story of Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, I'm not talking about the rapper Rick Ross, but the real Rick Ross, how he was in cahoots with the Contras, and how drugs were being brought to neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and there was a whole conspiracy behind it, and the CIA, and presidents that were divisive, where, and I won't say the names, but if you look it up, these things had been proven to be true, that they had put drugs in these neighborhoods and purposefully knew that it was going to be the demise of a lot of black people, and that it was going to bring that culture down. So you can't just blame poor black people for all of the destruction that happened. So if some people survive, they survive, and others may not. And I would say, she's like she says, rightfully so, she was surviving Compton. And I can say the same thing. I was surviving Inglewood because I lived in the sister city that had the same events, the same circumstance, the same situations. I can totally relate to her on all of that. And that really did happen back in that time. It really was a lot of abuse. And there was abuse from the system of the government, how they just, those neighborhoods, they're not looked at or valued. So you have generations of poverty, generations of criminal activity, stemming from poverty, from anger, from what racism has produced. And so you have also people who are in a better circumstance. They're not black, they're a different class of people, or they're in a different circumstance financially, and they live outside of these neighborhoods, and they do the blame game as well. Oh, the blacks did it. Oh, it's the black people's fault. Oh, they put themselves in that situation. Oh, they need to hold themselves accountable. Oh, all blacks are criminals. And that's not true. All Hispanics are criminals. That's not true. This generation right now, I don't see as many black gangs as I used to in the 80s and 90s. I see more Hispanic gangs. And so it's the same thing. When I look at the Hispanic gangs, it's like looking at the black gangs in the 80s and 90s. They're virtually making the same mistakes that have already been made, and only it's just happening to a new culture of people that have shared similar experiences with African culture, because we live in close proximity, and we have very similar or like cultures, and a lot of us are shared because of kinship. And not only that, you have Hispanic people who are part black, or they are black people, or black descent, or they have black descendants or black relatives. So that is, I believe, why they always have a knack, somehow in these neighborhoods. There's the poor blacks, and then there's the poor Hispanic people that live side by side, virtually side by side, even in the neighboring cities. So now you have this thing with MS-13, Losetas, and these cartels and all this stuff. This stuff is nothing new. This stuff has been going on, and governments tend to shy away and ignore the situation, and they let it get far out of control, and then they blame poor people for their demise. And it's just a cycle that seems to never end. So I just thought it was important to share this video that, this lady right here, she said that she was abused. I don't know if it happened in that same club, because I was wondering now after I saw the movie if it really in fact happened in that same club, or did this incident happen somewhere else, and was that a lady that happened to have some problem with Dr. Dre, was she a total another experience? Because I heard too there were other women that came forward and said that he was abusive to them as well. But I am glad that I saw the movie, and I was really thankful that Michelle came out and she expressed her personal views and what she experienced, because she's not the only survivor. There are a lot of young black women who have survived the same similar shared experiences.